Hola, hola. Today I'm super honored because I have a fellow Mexican with us today. Um, Pam, bienvenida.
Muchas gracias. I'm honored to be here. I'm excited.
And Pam is one of our newest speakers that we've just onboarded to NODA, and we were just talking. So Pam is from Mexico City, and I'm from the north. But it's a really fun, interesting dynamic between both worlds because I feel like accents are very different, but you can easily go to the north, o sea, del acento norte, and you can easily catch up the acento de la ciudad, o sea, del sur de la ciudad.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But no, we were just talking as well, and I'm going to dive into Pam and her work, and just the coaching she's doing now, and we're going to dive into some of the workshops that Pam is doing. And Pam, I want to talk a little bit about your background too. But before we go there, we were just both talking about the pressures of being a Mexican woman with your family and how I think it builds character. What do you feel?
Oh, totally. O sea, after we were talking about grandmothers and how blunt and like,
Yeah.
I don't know if that's honesty or just like straight up being rude. But like after that, I get nasty comments on YouTube and I'm like, listen, if I put up with my grandma, you can
Yeah,
tell me
I don't
whatever
care.
you want. No pasa nada. It's all good.
Exactly.
Yes.
But anyways, Pam, like I said, we're honored to have you. And, I love that you became the coach your immigrant mother never had. Like, let's
Mm-hmm.
start there.
Yeah. Yeah, I grew up with a single mom and she had a business and it was very successful in Mexico. And o sea, this is back in the day when there's no coaching, there's no business coaching, you're just kind of like doing it one foot in front of the other. And I'm an eldest daughter, and so I always wanted to get in the business with my mom. And she was always like, "No, your job is to go to school." Like, and she
Mhm.
never gave me a job, and I was like so upset. And I started working actually, I asked her friend who had another business to give me a job. I was 13 years old, and the friend was like, "Yeah, I need more hands. Let's go." And so I started working when I was 13, but it wasn't for my mom because she didn't let me. And then when I grew up, I got an opportunity to coach immigrant women, and I found so much affinity with them, so much like just compassion, and I wanted to give them everything. And that's when I realized adult me became the coach my mom at some point needed. Because now, while I couldn't help my mom and give her the resources, now I have the language, now I have the resources, now I have the cultural background to talk to them, and it's how it happened.
And when I look at data and how Latina women build businesses at, I mean, times five rate than any other woman in the United States. What do you see when you're coaching immigrant women, really? I mean, and I always say like immigrant women, we're all immigrants,
Yes.
right? So,
Yeah.
let's just put that to the side because I know it gets kind of tossed around in political conversations and et cetera. And so, but tell me, like, what are you seeing right now that your clients or women or in general Latinas are really, no, I don't want to say the word struggle,
Mm.
or facing or experiencing?
So one thing that I love when I work with women, with Latinas specifically, primarily women of color, and I ask them, why did you start your business? They always say to give my family freedom.
Hmm.
It's never like, so I can travel the world, or it's always like, so I
Consider
can.
selfless. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very much very rooted in the collectivism that is our culture. And what I'm with that, to answer your question of what do I see, there's a lot of, I mean, I think everyone faces this where family is like, well, why?
Mhm.
Go the safe route. Why don't you go, the corporate route where you have your retirement and you have your steady paycheck? Why do you want to do this? And so it's this, sometimes we could say lack of support, but it's really, I would say they just don't know what they don't know.
Mhm.
Many of them the people that I work with, they are the first in their family to start a business. They're the first one to take that risk. And so what they lack is that support system, because the people that they've surrounded themselves with are not on the same space.
Mhm.
And so I think one of the challenges is the lack of support system. I call it your squad. So they don't have a complete squad.
Mm. I think that's the first thing I did when I started my business, was surround myself with people. I was just telling my mom this morning, and because I was telling her, I love her to death. Obviously, she's my best friend and all the things, but she didn't teach me how to make money. I mean, it's just it
Mm,
is what it is, right? Because now she's all confident and like pushes my sister and everyone like, you need to
right.
be making 4 times, and I'm like, you didn't teach me that. Like, so let's go back to the root of it. But I think the root of it was, you know, um, finding a squad and finding people that believed in their ability to do more, so that you could break that fear, really,
Mhm.
and limitation that holds us small.
Totally. Yeah, because the squad is super important, because I mean, I have a whole framework on when I tell people about their squad.
Mhm.
And one is the pillars. And the pillars are the people that already did something that you want to do. We need to have aspirations. And so the walls también, the things that you put in your walls, they're people that you admire. And whether they are alive or dead or fictional or, but they are still someone that can mirror what you want to do. And if we don't have that, there's no way to look forward, because you
Mm.
just don't know what's the next step. So yeah, the squad is super important. Yo también, when I started my business, I was like, who can I talk to? And I actually joined a nonprofit that gives free coaching.
Mm.
When there's a will, there's a way.
When there's a will, there's a way. And this is, I mean, coaching, I know we're talking about coaching now, and I know it's one of the realms that you work in, right? Like it's
Yeah.
one of the spaces. But I want to talk about your speaking.
Hmm.
And you and I were just talking about how you do some some trainings for Google and et cetera, et cetera. And you have some really powerful workshops. I think, again, because of your experience with directly working with and I know in this space is, but you work with corporate women too, no?
Sí,
Hmm.
all the time.
It doesn't really matter kind of what you're we're all experiencing the same thing
Yeah.
at different levels. But talk to me about, you have several workshops. So I'm going to start with the own your voice and step into your power. So tell me more.
Hmm. Well, own your voice and step into your power. All of my work is rooted in Calladita Culture.
Mm.
And Calladita Culture, I have been working on Calladita Culture for over a decade. I would say my whole life, but we'll start with a decade. And this, I first started with principles. I call them principles, and there were 7. And now we're down to 5, and there are 5 wounds of Calladita Culture. And so Calladita Culture is the belief that we are instilled in how women are socialized. I always come from the Latina perspective, because that's who I am,
Mhm.
of calladita te ves más bonita. You look prettier when you're quiet. And so own your voice is rooted in the wound of silence. And the wound of silence is the wound that keeps you either quiet or too loud. Because something interesting happens is not everyone is undercompensated in what the wound is. There's also people that are over. And so this and everyone is different depending on how you grew up, depending on the socialization that you were given, depending on the beliefs that you heard, how people talked around you. So for me, for example, I would talk all the time, and my grandma would be like, "Calladita, te ves más bonita," like, don't ask a lot of questions. And so
Going back
I
to the
I
good thing.
know.
I mean, my grandma does follow me on LinkedIn, so she might see this and call me out.
Well, that's such a harmful thing to say.
No, no. Y sabes que, and we're gonna go back to your workshop. I always feel, and we're saying grandmas, and grandmas are such a blessing, right? To our lives. I mean, but it's they're holding on to like the old patterns and beliefs so much stronger than, like, for example, my mom, right?
Totally.
Because my mom was able to unlearn some of that, not totally all of it,
Yes.
but majority, right? With me and kind of my own journey, I brought her into my journey. Um, but it's like since you're little, eh,
Yeah.
el calladita. And I always find like my grandmother, they're both German and Lebanese, and their culture is not like that. But because they were, essentially raised in Mexico, right, or spent majority of their time in Mexico versus their place of origin, they were instilled, right? And so like that, it takes you, right, regardless of.
Cultural adjustment.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. And yes, we do talk a lot about the grandmas, and the other thing is that they didn't know.
Yeah,
They
they
didn't have
didn't
the
know. It's not
tools,
their fault, for sure.
and so they did the best they could with the tools they were handed. And so the stand in your power is when we explore the wound of silence to see where are you in this. It's kind of like a spectrum in a way. I'm neurodiverse. I have ADHD, so I love spectrums because I don't think anything is like super linear. And so the wound of silence, we go and we see, are you not speaking up? Are you not asking for more? Are you letting other people talk over you? Or are you on the opposite end where people have to tell you to tone it down, and maybe you've been told you're too loud, or there's different spaces, and we do a lot of exercises where you find kind of like where you toggle, and then we just do exercises to help you stand in your power, which is your truest version of you without having to prove yourself for others. It's for yourself. So it's always, we bring it back to what is the truest version of you that's the most authentic, unapologetic, without hearing the noise of someone else telling you you need to be less.
That's beautiful. This is like a prereq. I love
Basically.
this. Yeah. And let's go into let's thrive. So that what goes from overwhelmed into thriving with ease.
Yeah. Let's Thrive is a fun workshop for, I typically do Thrive, and Thrive is an acronym. And so again, because I love working with like frameworks, and I create very easy systems, and people tell me all the time that I just kind of like break things down in an easy way, and I'm like, listen, because my brain is thinking about a lot of things, so I need to make it the simplest way possible. So Let's Thrive, it's all about uncovering where you are, what's your bandwidth, and understanding how you work best. Because we also live in a world, I am a woman, I am a human who bleeds every month. And so I understand that my body cycles in a very different way. I cycle with the moon. Men, cis men, they cycle with the sun, which means that they recover much faster. And so the Thrive is a methodology in a way that helps us explore, where are you, what's your capacity, what works, what doesn't work, and how could you actually create a space where you can thrive instead of feeling like you're just chasing the next thing, because that's what we've been socialized to do. Is like chase the success, get the check mark, all the things, but like what is actually good for you? That's what we explore and Thrive.
I started working with the cycles and the seasons, I would say about 4 years ago, and it totally changed my life.
It's so wild. It's men
It's
and women can't work the same.
accessible to all of us, right? I mean, we just have to really get in tune with not only your cyclical, your own, like the cycle you were saying, like your kind of moon cycle, but also your yearly cycle. And yeah. So I'm so glad that you've curated in a way that is easy to incorporate, right?
Yeah, the Gregorian calendar messed us up.
It did. I'm sure it was done by men. I mean, there's no way a woman
100%.
was involved. Okay, so let's talk about the create a harmonious work culture where all talents on your team can thrive.
That's a workshop where we actually explore the seasons. And so I started working when I started my business, actually almost 10 years ago. I read all of the business books, I did all the business classes, and nothing resonated. And I'm like, well, that's because I have ADHD. My brain is just not like with that very linear aspect of it. And so I started kind of like creating my own thing. I started exploring other ways of planning things. And that's when I started. My whole business is around my cycle and the seasons of the earth.
Mm.
And so I realized that I was working with women and every human, really, not just women, how disconnected they were from their bodies and how that disconnection didn't allow them to fully understand what they wanted, where they wanted to go, because they were like out there in a different world.
Mm.
And so create a harmonious work culture where all talents in your team can thrive. It's such a mouthful. Is where I work with teams to explore who is part of the team, how are they cycling, and could we create and work around not just their I call them inner seasons. So just like we have 4 seasons of the earth, we have 4 seasons in our cycle: winter, spring, summer, autumn. Then you work around that, because there's actually a study with a soccer team in England, and they started training the team based on their cycle. And something they noticed is that they had less injuries, they increased performance, and everyone was just much happier. And of course, they switched. I'm sure at some point everyone was synced, but everyone was doing different trainings depending on where their cycle was, and they actually thrived. And so that's me reading that article is what inspired that workshop, because I'm like, if a soccer team of women can thrive by working with their inner seasons, why can't workplaces? And so
Yeah, I mean, it's going to take a long time, but it starts with us.
100%.
Right? It starts with us.
For sure.
Setting those boundaries within ourselves and knowing our capacity, so we know when we show up the best and
Totally.
when we're supposed to rest. And
yeah, it's a very individual workshop for that reason, because it's going to take a while for everyone to be on board with that. And having awareness, like when other people have awareness, you have language. And so if I show up and I'm like, look, I'm in winter right now, I can't really show up to that meeting. Do you really need me? Then the other person could be like, you know what? I understand. It's okay. I don't need you this time. I'll send you some notes. So that's the goal for that workshop. It's not to change the narrative around workplace. It's more so for people to start with themselves and then have language to speak
and share it with teams. That's really powerful. And so, okay, so plan your workshop now. Now discover that inner power that you already have. I was talking to a friend. I was going to say it. I think I have ADHD too. But I was talking to a friend that is now in menopause. I always think it's just not fascinating, but it's crazy to me how we've just now started talking about it, right? I mean,
and even perimenopause.
Yeah. And my mom the other day, she's like, you still have like 10, 20, 15 years. I'm like, please, I don't, I'm like scared of that.
Perimenopause starts 10 years earlier. It could start 10 years earlier.
No. Anyways, the good thing is they're starting to do research finally. I mean, how crazy.
Isn't that wild?
No, de veras.
Same with ADHD. The average age for women to get diagnosed is 36 years old.
There's no research on women. This is the problem.
That's the issue.
But I also don't understand how.
Well, I don't think women have arrived at that place in power where they say, why are we not doing this? The other thing is that arguably research is done on women, but it's postmenopausal women. And so, because what happens is that when scientists study women, you have to study them 4 times because of the 4 cycles. And so it's super expensive. So what they do to mask the study to say we did include women is they include postmenopausal women, which means that they're monocyclical like men.
Oh.
And so it's basically, it's much cheaper because they only have to study them once, because their hormones they're one with the earth now. They're no longer bleeding, so their hormones are not as drastic changing as far as.
Yeah, but I was talking to this friend who is in like the post menopause stage, and she did say there's rituals and things you can do
Mhm.
also still have a cycle, right? Like not
Mhm.
necessarily a bleeding cycle, but still be in connection with the moon cycles and
You're one
creating.
with the earth.
Yeah, but that is, I didn't know that the most of the research was done. Yeah, it makes sense.
It's so when
Yeah,
I
think
found
about
out.
pregnancy now, right? And this journey that I'm in, I'm like telling another friend, there's people do not talk about this enough. This is crazy. I mean, the fact that, I'm very grateful that I don't have to go to, like drive to work or be in places where I have to be there in person. But some women do, and
Yeah.
work in, spaces where they're, having to be like standing all day. And yeah, and your body just is working twice as hard.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just, we're really super, we have super,
Humans.
yeah, we are superhuman.
Do you know the story about Sheryl Sandberg? When she was pregnant, she
No.
realized that at Google, they didn't have a parking lot for pregnant moms, for moms to be, and so she had to walk, like, miles and miles, and because she had a position of power, she was like, "Why did no one think of putting a mom-to-be parking lot or a couple?"
Mhm.
And it wasn't until a woman was in that position
Yeah. No,
that
and I've
she
messaged
did it.
a lot of my kind of people officer, you know, friends, and I've just been kind of sharing my journey and being like, what are you doing with your people, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the first trimester of pregnancy, you really have no control because your body is trying to fight the fact that you're pregnant.
Yeah.
And some women feel like that the whole pregnancy, right? I mean, it's a very
Yeah.
individual, but what can you do? What are you doing for those that can't show up? And so, I mean, talking about superpowers, you have a workshop that is called Your Identity is Your Superpower. So tell me a little bit more.
Yeah, your identity is your superpower is also there's a wound of identity, and the wound of identity is the one that either you're overlooked or you like all you talk about is your identity. And
Mm,
so your identity is your superpower is also that one is mainly for first gens, for those firsts in their family, eldest daughters, children of immigrant, first in their family to go to college, all the
mm,
firsts. Because we tend to take an identity based on what others, especially children of immigrant, we wanna make them proud, it's like the infamous story of, "I became a lawyer because my dad wanted me to be a lawyer," but you don't really wanna be a lawyer,
mhm,
So, it's really uncovering what is your true identity without the noise of whoever expects you to be, and also taking on the various roles that we take, because I have clients, for example, who are very successful, and they're only that, they are the doctor. And I'm like, well, what about you being like a sister? And it's really hard to take that that persona off because they've embodied the successful one so much
mhm,
that it can't get them to be anything else. And so your identity is your superpower is how do we peel all the pieces of who you are and blend them into one so you can be super proud of who you are without being questioned. Also, the people that don't que no hablan español,
mhm,
that they feel like there's this narrative that's been going around, like, are you Latina enough or whatever?
mm,
Everyone is enough. And so your identity is your superpower. We uncover how do you give yourself permission to feel plenty.
mm,
And I use a lot of somatic tools. So we work a lot with the body because we tend to be in our head so much. And so when we bring ourselves back to the body, then you're able to fully feel because we
mm,
also are trained not to feel.
mm. Yeah. I can relate a lot to that, being the first of the first, and then also eldest.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had so many hard conversations with like, I mean, many people, but with myself especially, but even with my mom of like, I might have to slow down a little bit, right? When I have a baby, and
Yeah.
it's okay, right? Like my identity is not who I am, what I do. It's who I am. I mean, that's it, right? Like who I am as a person, as a being.
Yeah.
And it's hard.
It is hard because we're trained to do. And so when you tune into your power, when you stand in your power, you're actually being. And
Mm,
it's hard to be, because to be is to feel, to exist, to bring presence.
mm,
And it's easier to be like, oh, what do I need to do next? What's next on my list? Instead of, well, who am I right now in this moment? Because we also change our mind. We also change seasons. You're moving into a season of motherhood. That's
mhm.
going to change your identity
Oh, for
and how
sure.
you work and how you exist and how you be. And so it's giving ourselves permission to embrace that.
Mhm.
Change is necessary. It's the only constant. And how could we embrace it and accept it? Because that's inevitable.
Mhm. Yeah. Totally. Yeah. Well, we shall see how. I will be definitely sharing with you the truth.
I know.
What I am experiencing and seeing and the whole thing. But Pam, so nice having you today. I mean, I could literally go on and on hablando contigo. And like I said, we're excited to have you in our bureau and explore partnerships together and bring you to some of our clients. And yeah, I mean,
Thank
anything
you.
you'd like to share that you haven't said?
No, I think one question that I could ask people is, how could you give yourself permission to be today?
Mm, mm. This is such a good time to think, to
Mhm.
ask yourself that question too, because we're going
Mhm.
into winter and the days are
Mhm.
starting to be darker, and there's a fear associated with that, right? Of when there's more darkness, right? Because it kind of forces you to look within. And
That's my jam.
yeah, I know. I'm excited for winter, but I'm in this like cusp of like, let me try to be as productive as I can.
Totally. Yeah,
And I
you
was
have a
sitting
deadline.
in meditation this morning and I pulled a card and the card was like, you need to go on the journey now.
Oh.
Like kind of stop distracting yourself and like embrace, this next stage of your life and prepare for it. And it's scary,
You
uh,
got it.
but I got it and everyone got it. And
Yeah.
and it's a beautiful ending. How can you give yourself permission to be today?
Yeah.
Thank you for that gift.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.